So I don't know if you're watching this on the same day or not, but I decided to, in addition to making a video on relative clauses and pronouns, I decided I should go ahead and just make one on interrogative pronouns as well. The Latin 2 book, for those of you guys in my class who are actually reading Ecce Romani, Latin 2 book begins in chapter 28 with relative clauses and then moves right on into 29 with a bunch of stuff that's actually really similar to relative clauses, and that includes interrogative pronouns. Now, the nice bit about this topic as compared to relatives is that you learn the relative pronoun so that you can use relative clauses. And the relative clause is, like I said in that other video, a whole clause that is separate from the main idea. With interrogative pronouns, it's actually not going to be setting up a whole clause. Right now, we actually just need to learn how to, ask questions. And actually, these are words that, again, you sort of know. In fact, I didn't even completely reset up the board. Like you'll notice here that I just changed who and which to who and what, and I didn't even bother rewriting the whole word. Because they're sort of the same word, right? Who and which is kind of the same as who and what. You're just using them to different purposes, right? So in the last video, I was talking about how I was teaching you how to use the word who, but not when it's a question. Well, if it's an interrogative pronoun, then we are talking about who when it's a question. That's why I changed which to what, although even there's a lot of overlap, right? I mean, sometimes we do use the word which in a question. But here, yeah, I'm definitely focusing on the question uses. And in the same way that who and what are nearly identical to the relative in English, right? Who could be relative or interrogative. It's actually sort of the same in Latin. When you look at the form here, the masculine, instead of having a qui in the nominative singular, is a quis. But that's actually the only part of the form that's different. The rest of the forms are actually literally the same. They're not different. It's just that one little letter that's different, and that makes it who the question and not who the relative. Okay? And in fact, again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the forms here. If you need to pause and write them down, then go ahead and pause. Or, look them up elsewhere. In your book, on a website, there are plenty of places to find it. But I do want to point out some of the other things that are different, because they're mostly the same as the relative pronoun. But there is kind of the really notable difference that the feminine and the masculine, at least in the singular, are not different. So yeah, part of this is because if you're asking like who did a thing, you wouldn't really know if it was, a man or a woman. You would just be asking who. And so maybe because of that, you don't really ever see quam or qua as a relative pronoun. You just see quem or quo, no matter who it might refer to. So there's not a difference between the singular masculine and singular feminine. However, if you are using the plurals, which don't show up as much, they're actually just the same as they were in the relative. So qui quorum quibus quos quibus, quae quorum quibus quas quibus, there's no differences there. Even in the neuter plural, there's no difference from what the neuter plural was before. There is, however, the difference in the neuter singular of having quid instead of quod. And that's actually not new. We've seen quis and quid at various points in our Latin 1 book, so that shouldn't be too surprising. And I did put up some usage examples here as well, but they're a lot less complicated than the relative ones were. The relative clause examples were necessarily complicated sentences in as much as there was a main idea and a subordinate idea, which was the relative clause. But for an interrogative, you don't really have anything that complicated going on. I mean, you might have a complicated sentence as a question, but you could just as easily have a very simple sentence like a question. Like in the last video, when I was talking about what the relative clause was not, I gave the throwback to the movie Hook, who's the shrub? It's one of my favorite scenes. I love it. I just love when Thud jumps out, who's the shrub? So that's what I chose to write here. Who is the shrub? Quis est arbuscula? Right? It's literally just asking a question, and quis is the word who. The one difference, though, between what you're going to see in level 2 versus level 1 is that in level 1, when this was in our book, they only ever used it in this form, in the nominative form where it meant who. All right? Which is to say, in the Latin 2 book, they're going to get more complicated by using it in other cases. Now, again, with the other cases, the same rules apply that always apply with the other cases. So if you were to use a genitive, for instance, it would be of whom or whose if it's possessive. So in this would be whose shrub is this? So yeah, you're just changing it to whose instead of who because it's possessive. Or you might use whom. I didn't put an example of every case here, but I did put an accusative one. So, quem amas, this would say, whom do you love? I know in English, colloquially, we don't usually say, whom do you love? We usually say, who do you love? There's even that great Bo Diddley song, Who Do You Love? Technically, it should be, whom do you love? Now, I'm not suggesting that you go correcting Bo Diddley's grammar, because if you were to cover that song, but correct it to, whom do you love? That would actually probably sound like trash. Don't do that. But if you're just, talking in, conversation and you want to be grammatically correct, since quem is a direct object, you would use the direct object form of who to translate it, which is to say whom, right? And yeah, it's that simple. So if you have questions about this, as always, make sure you talk to me in G class, or if you're not one of my students, you can always reply to this video. Although, honestly, I don't know if I would actually end up seeing it, as I mostly do this from my phone, and answering YouTube comments from my phone is not super easy. Maybe that'll change in the future, I don't know. But this has been the interrogative pronoun. I'm going to come back real soon, not today, but sometime soon, to talk about something that's real similar to both the relative and the interrogative, and that's indefinites. So see you in a few days to talk about those. Bye, guys.